I think that most baseball fans, myself included, don't always realize just how random the MLB draft is. All drafts in every professional sport do have a factor of randomness, as there's always going to be roadblocks and growing pains moving up to the professional level, but I think that the complex minor league system that baseball possesses increases those roadblocks tenfold, making it really seem like teams are drafting lottery tickets rather than developmental stars in baseball. For example, many first-round picks in the NFL or NBA immediately start out as everyday players for their top club, and the number one overall pick is almost guaranteed a path to stardom and is at worst an everyday player for at least the next couple of years. However, for baseball, even the number one overall pick has to go through a year or two of grinding at the minor league level, and if they suffer a couple of injuries or developmental issues along the way, then they could never see time at the major league level ever. What's more, this increased randomness is amplified even more when you realize just how much the draft matters compared to other drafts. In the NFL or NBA, rookie deals only last 4 years with some restricted years on top of that. However, for baseball, rookie deals last at least 6 years with 3 of them at the league minimum, which can be leveraged to sign a contract for even longer than that. And so, with a draft that is super important to get right, combined with a system that induces more misses than hits when it comes to major league starters, the question which teams are the best at drafting becomes a very important one to answer for predicting the overall major league landscape. And surprisingly, there's not really a clear-cut answer online as to which team is truly the best at drafting. So this video will cover multiple indicators as to what counts as a successful draft to hopefully answer the question. But before we get on to this video, could you guys please hit the like and subscribe button? Currently, only 3% of people who watch my videos are subscribed, so if y'all do, not only would it help me grow my channel, but also would encourage me to create more videos like this one for you guys. And without further ado, let's get on to the video. So to start out, the easiest and definitely most simple way to measure the success of a team's draft strategy is to find out how many draftees ultimately turn into major leaguers. Unlike other drafts where the vast majority of picks see some form of playing time at the highest level, the majority of MLB draftees will unfortunately never get to the major league level. About 2/3 of first-round picks make it to the major league level, but that number drops off a cliff as the draft gets deeper into its rounds. Therefore, for a team to draft a high number of players that eventually reach the major league level is a credit to their ability to scout and develop players that are capable of withstanding the minor league grind and reach the major league level. Additionally, since trading picks is generally not allowed, teams roughly have the same number of selections in every draft as other teams, meaning that, in terms of the quantity of opportunities to get players, they are also roughly equal. And so, all we have to do is count how many players make it to the major leagues for each team in each draft, and for the sample size, I chose 2010 all the way to current day. I didn't want to go too far back because teams have regime changes all the time, and the way a team drafted back in the late 20th century to early 2000s is definitely different than the way the teams draft now. And 2010 is about the latest time to be called the current era in terms of drafting players. However, at the same time, I needed to have a large enough sample size of usable data, and since it takes a pretty long time for draft picks to pan out, most of the numbers from the draft classes in the 2020s just don't give me a ton of information to work off of, forcing me to go backwards a little bit more. Additionally, I also want to set a few ground rules as to what counts for a major leaguer in my case study. If a player is drafted by a team, signs, and then is traded away to another team where he makes his major league debut there, that counts as a major leaguer for the team that initially drafted him. However, if a player is drafted by a team and doesn't sign, only to be drafted a later year and make his major league debut for that team, then it doesn't count for the team that initially drafted him in the first place, because he didn't sign with them. The rationale here is that, for the first example, in most cases the player had a change of scenery because the player was traded, and in that case, the original team still got some existing value back from that original draft pick, still deeming it as a successful selection. However, for the second example, even though the team who drafted the player saw the vision in a potential major leaguer, they didn't get any real value from that pick itself. The A's didn't get any value when they drafted Aaron Judge in the 38th round, and when the Yankees selected Austin Wells twice, once in 2018 and once in 2020, they didn't get 2 major league starters even though they spent 2 picks. So therefore, any pick in which the player did not sign with the team was not counted, and any compensation for that failed signing was simply baked into the next year's draft. And last but not least, I would also like to mention that the spreadsheet with all the data is in the description down below, if you would like to see it for yourself and even make a copy to find your own trends. So now, with both the range and constraints set into place, let's get into the data. Not surprisingly, the Astros are first on this list with 88 major leaguers, and with 412 signed players since 2010, that means that they have a success rate of just over 21.5%. Although this is skewed downward slightly because of the newest drafts that haven't fully developed yet. The Astros were renowned in the mid to late 2010s in terms of their cutting-edge analytical scouting coupled with the newest technologies and techniques in their development, so it makes sense as to why they rank at the top of this list. These rankings showcase a little bit why this Astros team has seen a ton of success since 2017, as not only did they find their stars in the draft like Kyle Tucker, Alex Bregman, George Springer, Lance McCullers Jr., and Carlos Correa, but they also consistently found even more players in the middle to later rounds to be quality depth pieces or to be used in trades. And as for some of the other teams in the top 5, the Yankees, Rangers, Dodgers, and Blue Jays, with anywhere from 80 to 82 players and a success rate around 20%, we see some of the most well-run organizations as well as some that have enjoyed sustained runs of success throughout this time period. I've talked on this channel how both the Yankees and Dodgers have maintained their success in the 21st century despite consistently having a winning record. And while their top-end payroll is a huge factor in that, they're also two of the most savvy organizations when it comes to drafting and development of top prospects, and it shows on this list. Meanwhile, the Rangers and Blue Jays have both had multiple periods of success during this window, in large part due to deep teams built through the draft and the assets acquired in trades from the draft itself. And by contrast, now switching over to the bottom teams in the Phillies, Nationals, Marlins, Cubs, D-backs, and White Sox, in the range of 52 to 63 major leaguers and a success rate in the low teens. While these teams have also experienced success in this time frame, it was much more built on their high-end draft picks, smart trades, and good free agent signings rather than consistent depth throughout the roster. Additionally, these teams have all hit some pretty tough times in the 21st century, potentially a result of not getting a ton from the draft compared to other teams. I wouldn't call all of these teams as having a bad front office compared to others, at least not in the current day, but a combination of front office factors as well as a roster that has focused more on other factors outside of the draft has led to these teams placing so low in these rankings specifically. However, even though the results made some sense from a front office and major league perspective, I feel like simply using the amount of major leaguers from each team is a bit overgeneralizing. Even among those who made the major leagues, there are a ton of different ways that their career could go, and even though longtime superstars like Francisco Lindor or Manny Machado have made a drastic impact on their teams compared to players who may just be depth pieces, the major league chart treats them as all the same. As a result, I think that, while helpful for painting a general picture of a team's organizational draft and development strategy, our current strategy could be a little bit better if it valued more productive players a little bit more heavily. Luckily for us, there is an overarching stat used amongst both pitchers and hitters that is a pretty good indicator of production across an entire career. While not perfect amongst all positions or styles, it does a great job at quantifying productivity and separates and weights the elites in our game properly. So, using the same range from 2010 to 2024 and the same constraints that we used in the last one, let's look at wins above replacement per baseball reference rankings per team from the draft. In terms of wins above replacement rankings, a lot of things still remain the same. The Astros continue to have the best drafts in both in terms of players to make the major leagues and production once there. And this is in large part due to the core that I discussed earlier, as picks like Correa, Springer, Tucker, and Bregman carry this list as some of the most productive players in the league for the last decade. However, now that we are talking about the quality of MLB talent rather than just the quantity, a couple of things are shaken up. For starters, the Orioles, who were in the middle of the pack in the last graph, jump up to elite status almost on par with the Astros in their drafts. When we think of their drafts, we think of guys like Adley, Gunnar, or Machado, who all contribute a ton to these rankings, but they have also found a ton of value throughout the draft. Third rounder Austin Hayes, fourth rounder Christian Walker, and sixth rounder Tanner Scott are just a couple of players that the Orioles have drafted to become one of the top drafters in the league. Additionally, the Cardinals and Athletics also jump onto those lists. Two teams that for a long time have navigated a pretty middling payroll to field a decently competitive team, especially in 2010s, and the White Sox, who are in the bottom 5 in the last list of players, suddenly jump up into the top 5 of these rankings, meaning that, while few and far between, the players called up by the White Sox are some very quality players. Among them, a few notable selections by the White Sox are first-rounders Chris Sale, Tim Anderson, and Garrett Crochet, and sixth-rounder Marcus Semien, although the White Sox did not reap all of the rewards for that gem of a draft pick. Moving on to the bottom now, and while the Phillies remain the same, the other four are all new. The Giants, Angels, and Reds jump into this list, and the Rangers pull a reverse White Sox with a ton of major leaguers who made the major leagues, but not with a ton of them being productive players. And when you look at the states of all of them, it makes a decent amount of sense. Every team has great players, but when you look at the Giants, for example, who signed Matt Chapman and Jung-Hoo Lee and drafted Posey and Bumgarner before this case study, they don't have a ton of stars that they can draw on from the draft itself. It's the same with the Reds, who signed Elly De La Cruz as an international free agent, the Angels, who drafted Trout before in 2009, the Rangers, who signed Seager, Semien, DeGrom, and the Phillies, who signed Harper, Schwarber, and Wheeler. A ton of their star production does not come from the draft especially, and since this is a list that heavily weights stars from the draft, it also showcases their lack of draft success in a quantifiable way, although they did get stars in other ways. And so, does that mean that the Astros and Orioles are the best drafters, while the Phillies, Giants, Angels, and Rangers are the worst? After all, the graph seems to point at this being the case. However, I think that using this one alone overgeneralizes the draft in a way that we don't really know the context in which these players are being drafted from. For example, both the Orioles and Astros have had multiple number 1 overall picks in the same period, while the Phillies and Giants, who have had runs of success and very competitive seasons, have consistently picked lower in the draft compared to their peers. Are the Orioles and Astros really better drafters even if they've had wider selections of talents to pick through, or are they merely benefiting from the best opportunity to pick the safest and most high upside talents? In order to figure this out, I'm going to look at one last dataset, this time taking out the production made by first rounders. The idea is with this one is that it sort of levels the playing field a little bit. The difference in value between the 1st overall pick and the 10th overall pick is much greater than the difference between the 41st overall pick and the 50th overall pick. And what's more, likely every team has already had a shot of drafting players in the 2nd round and beyond, so these rankings really showcase a developmental eye in drafting players that other teams may have overlooked. Additionally, removing first rounders also gets rid of those pesky compensation round picks, which happen after the 1st round and could unfairly skew the distribution of production because there are just more chances to select major leaguers. So, in terms of overall fairness, looking at the 2nd round and beyond only really showcases some more organizational skills much better than just overall WAR rankings from the draft. And before we get onto those rankings, I first want to show the rankings from just the 1st round, just because it showcases some very interesting trends. Predictably, the Astros and Orioles are some of the top teams in terms of 1st round talents. However, what's interesting is that the Padres are also at the top. Mediocre to bad throughout most of the 2010s, the Padres have made sense in terms of having valuable 1st rounders. However, they are not the team that initially comes to mind when you think of star 1st rounders on their team. And that's because historically, AJ Preller has been very aggressive in trades, which have cost him the production of many 1st rounders. Some notable selections are Trey Turner, selected 13th overall in 2014, only to be traded that offseason for Will Myers; Max Fried, selected 7th overall in 2012 and then traded 2 years later for Justin Upton; CJ Abrams, the 6th overall pick in 2019, and Mackenzie Gore, the 2nd overall pick in 2017, who were both traded for Juan Soto right after reaching the major leagues. This goes to show that, even though a team may be excellent in finding talents, there's more to an organization than just the draft. And draft success, while an indicator, may not be the sole reason as to a team's overall success. Hopefully, San Diego's recent move of extending their drafted stars like Jackson Merrill is a sign of things to come for an organization who ultimately has excellent scouting and development. And on the flip side, I also want to talk about how historically bad the Giants' run have been at finding talents in the 1st round. They've had multiple World Series rings from this time period, so it makes sense that they may have lower draft picks consistently, but across 15 drafts, they have a combined 16.5 wins per replacement, or on average less than 2 WAR per player. An average player gets around 2 WAR in just one season, so for the Giants to not even get that for one season from their players is simply astonishing. It may not be as bad as it seems, as Elliot Ramos and Patrick Bailey both look like solid players, but the inability to find productive players in the 1st round has been one of the main reasons why the Giants have not been able to find consistent success after Posey and Bumgarner have left since the 2020s, despite being in a larger market. Now, after that talk of the 1st round, let's get into the production from the 2nd round and beyond. After the Astros ranked 1st on every list beforehand, after getting rid of their historical 1st round production, they merely fall to the middle of the pack. Therefore, for the new number 1 team, at least for the 2nd round and beyond goes to the St. Louis Cardinals. Once again, this makes sense. The Cardinals have been known as a gritty team with an organizational structure that teams poach from all the time, so for them to lead the pack in finding diamonds in the rough makes a ton of sense. Among their selections, some notable ones include 2020 2nd rounder Mason Wynn, 3rd rounders Zach Gallen and Harrison Bader, 4th rounder Paul DeYoung, 5th rounder Ryan Helsley, 6th rounder Tommy Edman, and 7th rounder Brendan Donovan, as well as 8th rounder Lars Nootbaar. The depth acquired in this draft's later rounds is a huge reason as to why the team can consistently field a competitive roster. And meanwhile, the Orioles also stay on top of this list, and additionally, this is the first time that we see the gritty Rays make the top 5 appearance on this list. The Rays may be at the forefront in terms of scouting and development, so for them to find these diamonds in the rough also makes a ton of sense. For the Rays, some notable selections include 3rd rounders Brandon Lau and Tyler Walls, 7th rounders Jake Cronenworth and Joe Ryan, and 13th rounder Nathaniel Lowe. Not only have these players been productive for the Rays, but they have also been used in trades to bring in some more value for them. And for the Rays who have a small budget to work with, they almost have to find these diamonds in the rough to stay competitive. The Blue Jays are also at the top, and the Guardians and Mariners, both renowned for their ability to develop pitching, specifically stand out as well as teams capable of finding more of these pitching diamonds in the rough. Meanwhile, at the bottom, it's a similar story. The Phillies and Reds, who don't really get a ton of production from the draft in general, don't get much past the first round either. And the Padres, Cubs, and Pirates, who have enjoyed a ton of success in the first round, have not had the same amount of success picking past the first. Looking at these teams from the bottom third specifically, I see a couple of trends. 1, they win a ton of games due to free agent signings or savvy trades, or 2, they are kind of stuck in the mud organizationally, and this is in large part due to the lack of finding overall depth in the draft, even though they may find successful first-rounders to act as star talents. And so, looking at the 4 graphs we have made so far, which graph best answers the question as to which teams are the best and worst at drafting? Well, unfortunately, I don't think it's that simple. While including the first round adds a little bit of unequal balancing in draft capital, it would also be unfair to exclude it entirely, as teams like the Dodgers or Athletics still find value despite not having totally elite selections, and should be recognized for doing so. Meanwhile, the Pirates, who have drafted some stars at the top of the draft like Paul Skeens or Garrett Cole, haven't seen that much success past the first round. So is it their drafting or is it just the picks? To satisfy this dilemma in the best possible way, I think that the best course of action is to look at all of these graphs not in a vacuum, but within the context of its meaning as well as its situation compared to the other graphs. Personally, I'd weight the second round and beyond draft as having the most to do with an organization's skill in the draft, followed by the overall rankings, then just the first rounders, then the MLB talent numbers. However, I could see a world in which they could be weighted differently as well, and have no qualms about it. For teams that stand out to me as particularly good in the draft, I would go with the Cardinals, Orioles, and Astros as my top 3 teams that are the best at drafting, with the A's, Guardians, Blue Jays, and Rays in that secondary tier as almost elite. Meanwhile, for teams worst at drafting, the Phillies, Giants, Reds, and Angels stick out to me as teams that specifically have not gotten a ton out of the draft. Those are my conclusions from this study, but let me know if you see anything differently. Also, keep in mind that drafting is only a small part of a team's organizational prowess. Smart free agent signings, the international market, smart trades, and the waiver wire are all ways in which a team can thrive in to achieve success outside of the draft. So even if the draft is specifically not their strong suit, it doesn't mean that they have a poor front office. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and sticking all the way to the end. Let me know if you have any other video ideas that you'd like to see made, maybe which team is the best at international signings. But without further ado, I will see you guys all in the next one. God bless.